the main loser from this reshuffle was Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, who frankly, I mean, let's be real, not had the best of times in that role at all. Some people questioning why on earth he was put there in the first place. Of course, remember, he was fired by Theresa May a few years ago at the weakest point of her premiership, remember, because she was under siege from the whole Brexit situation that was happening at the time. Gavin Williamson was fired, I believe he was Defence Secretary at the time, and he was fired for leaking secrets from the National Security Council, which is just absolutely extraordinary. Theresa May fired him at one of the weakest points of her premiership, yet somehow ended up being Education Secretary under Boris Johnson. Well, I say somehow. Really, it's because he was the guy that ran his campaign and got all the votes counted to make sure that Boris Johnson could get to the final ballot in the leadership campaign in 2019 and then go on to win the contest. And so, in many respects, Boris Johnson is Prime Minister today, partly because of Gavin Williamson. But now we've had 2 years of him as Education Secretary. He's not done so well, and so as a result, he is now out of that job. The obvious blind spot for Gavin Williamson during his time as Education Secretary was the A-level and GCSE grading fiasco, the total disaster that unfolded in 2020 with the whole algorithm situation, unfairly marking down students who had done quite well, but because they come from certain schools who had traditionally gotten lower grades, the grades of the top scoring students were also brought down. Just a nightmare for all those young people who had worked so hard to then be thrown under the bus for no real reason. And so his failure in ensuring that was handled better is obviously the main reason why he's not in the job. It does seem like Gavin Williamson may have resigned before he was pushed out, but either way, it was not a very good tenure for him at all. He's been replaced by Nadhim Zahawi, who is, of course, the very successful vaccines minister. He was born in Baghdad in 1967, came to the UK when he was 9 years old, didn't speak a word of English, and now he's the Secretary of State for Education. I mean, what a story, and very successful as vaccines minister. The UK has had one of the most successful vaccination rollouts in the world, and so it will be interesting to see how he takes that success forward at education. It's a very difficult brief, education. Michael Gove was obviously notorious for that in 2010, all the reforms that took place, not very liked at all. So let's see how Nadhim Zahawi deals with the education brief, but certainly I think a lot of teachers and students are very pleased that Gavin Williamson is no longer in that job. A surprise exit from the cabinet, Robert Buckland as Justice Secretary. Now, he is allegedly a Johnson loyalist. He's someone that's been supportive of the Prime Minister, but he is no longer in the role. And the conventional wisdom seems to be that is because not necessarily did anything wrong, but because Boris Johnson needed a space to put Dominic Raab, because Dominic Raab is now replacing Robert Buckland as the Justice Secretary. Dominic Raab was, of course, the Foreign Secretary up until this point, but has come under increasing scrutiny because of the withdrawal of Afghanistan and the UK's handling of that, along with the United States. That's a whole other story. But Dominic Raab was on holiday during the fall of Kabul, failed to make an important telephone call to his Afghan ally, which therefore meant that hundreds of people that could have escaped Afghanistan weren't able to at the time. Very, very complicated matters, the fall of Kabul and all that. Dominic Raab has now paid the price for his mishandling of that, and he is now out as Foreign Secretary, but will take the place of Robert Buckland as Justice Secretary, which makes perfect sense because Dominic Raab has a legal background, he's a legal eagle, he knows that brief very well, so should be well suited to that job. Also out of a job, Robert Jenrick, Housing Community Secretary. Now, interestingly about Robert Jenrick, he was involved in some scandal last year over planning certain money that was supposed to be paid and wasn't paid, and he allowed a businessman to get away with it. Big story there. He's out as Housing Secretary. Amanda Milling, co-chair of the Conservative Party, she is out as well. I'm not quite sure what that's all about, maybe because of the results that took place in Amersham. Maybe there was a bit of a backlash towards that, who knows. Dominic Raab, of course, moved, as I said before, to Justice Secretary. Also about Dominic Raab, now the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, Dominic Raab has up until this point been the first Secretary of State, which is the de facto Deputy Prime Minister, but now Dominic Raab officially given the title of Deputy Prime Minister. It's not a title that's in use all the time. It's, an on and off sort of thing. The last person to hold that title, of course, was Nick Clegg in 2010-2015. We all know how that turned out for him, so we'll see how that plays out.